Test. Yeah, I'm happy if the
Oh, it's gone on. Oh, yes. Good morning, everyone. It says it's 10 o'clock on my iPad. So we'll start with the health and safety announcement. There's no fire alarm drill anticipated today, so if the alarm does sound, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit, which I think for us is only that, and following the signs above the doors.
There is none.
no. Oh, well. Follow everyone else out.
Yes.
That way.
Head for the door, try not all to get through it at once. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there till you're told it's safe to return. This is a smoke-free building, so if you wish to smoke, there's a smoking shelter at the rear of the car park alongside the building. Toilets are available in the stairwell of the building, right across there, sorry Mike. At each floor landing, and water is available in reception, also across that way. And finally, please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. I got caught out with that one myself last time, didn't I? So I will just do that myself. So, good morning and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Tuesday the 12th of March 2024. I'm your chair, Councillor Ollie Davey. To my left is Vice Chair Mike Howe. The supporting officers present are Ed Freeman. This is just a test that I do recognise everybody. Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management. Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor. And Wendy Harris, Democratic Services Officer. Oh yes, and we also have present Melanie Wellman, who's our monitoring officer for the first item. Okay, can I remind everyone the meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website, so could all members and officers making a contribution to the meeting please use a microphone or your comments won't be recorded. So we'll now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with yourself, Councillor Davey.
Present.
Vice Chair, Councillor Howe.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Bailey. Present. Thank you. Councillor Jess Bailey. Present. Thank you.
Present.
Councillor Collins.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hartnell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Levine.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Olive.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Parr.
Present.
Thank you. We are caught for today's meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, So agenda item 1 is apologies. So who do we have?
Just 2 apologies, Councillor Kevin Blakey and Councillor Charlotte Fitzgerald.
Okay. Anybody else got any other apologies to pass on? No? That's excellent. Good. Declarations of interest. Have we had any on the sheet?
If I could open it up to the room, if you could just put your hands up if you have any declarations for today's meeting. Non-committee members as well? Lovely, thank you.
Okay, agenda item 3, public speaking. We have Mr. Paul James here, who's going to speak on item 7, the proposed employment sites for consultation. You're going to speak apparently about Woodbury 38, or Wood/38, site adjoining Greendale Business Park. Okay, would you like to come forward to the microphone? Just press the little button at the bottom.
Is that right? Yep. Good morning, members, and thank you for letting me speak today. I'm here today to speak to you about the land adjoining Greendale Business Park and the expansion of the business park. I want to provide you with a true reflection of what businesses are facing due to current unavailability of employment land in East Devon. Last week, I met with a company director from a business who wishes to expand their operation. The applicant, who operates out of 3 different buildings near the airport, wants to consolidate into one building totaling 70,000 square foot to improve efficiencies. The applicant's business is headquartered in East Devon. It currently employs 70 people and has a turnover of over £9 million per annum. The applicant has had numerous discussions with landowners and property agents, and there is nothing suitable available. The applicant approached Greendale as it is a preferred site of theirs, but unfortunately, Greendale is unable to assist on this occasion, despite wanting to accommodate this requirement. Greendale is currently at capacity and cannot be extended any further due to the constraints of the development boundary. The business park is currently fully let, with any vacant space under offer. This is great news, but does not help with unmet demand. Greendale employs over 2,000 people, some of whom may be your friends or family members. Greendale generates business rates of over £2.25 million a year, payable to East Devon Council. This is significant and helps deliver vital services which we all know are under huge financial pressure. Greendale can expand sustainably. Woodbury Parish Council are keen to discuss the possible expansion as they see the benefits this will bring. The owners of the business park can expand Greendale quickly and without the need to purchase any land, and this will accelerate business rates contributions by £2 million per year and increase jobs to over 3,000. The business park will have an overall rateable value of £8.5 million, with rates payable to East Devon Council totalling £4.3 million per year at this already established and successful employment hub. Members, if this applicant I met cannot expand, they will be forced to leave East Devon, and 70 people will be forced to either relocate or face losing their job. The consequences of this are that 70 families will not be spending their money locally. An annual contribution of £200,000 of business rates will be foregone by the single occupier alone. These things matter, as it is the local businesses and the local economy that will suffer. I ask one question. If this was your business, or these employees happen to be people you know, would you be comfortable in the knowledge that you could have done something to prevent this? If you want to keep skilled jobs in East Devon and maintain economic growth, please think carefully and positively consider the Greendale Business Park expansion plan, as I urge you to support it.
Thank you very much. You make a very good case. Okay, agenda item 4, matters of urgency. I don't think we have any. No. Agenda item 5, to agree any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded. We have none of those. And so we move on to agenda item 6, the creation of a local plan member working group. This is on pages 3 and 4 of your agenda. And I'll go over it. It's Melanie, you're going to deal with this one. Yeah, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as members are aware, we're clearly at a critical stage of development of the new local plan. And therefore, what this report is inviting you to consider is the setting up of a local plan working group that can oversee progress in relation to that plan over the coming months. What it's really important to be clear is that group will not be making any decisions. All the decisions will still be coming very much into this committee. It will just be making sure that, you know, progress is happening as it should be, and giving the team the opportunity to obviously bring in sort of updates into that group, so that you can be satisfied as a committee that there is somebody that is overseeing the process in between committee meetings. What I'm proposing is that it is a committee made up of, a working group made up of the Leader of Council, Chair and Vice Chair, and 4 other members of the Strategic Planning Committee. In terms of frequency of meetings, they will be daytime meetings, so it does need to be a member that, members that would be able to accommodate meetings during the daytime. We anticipate probably every 2 to 3 weeks during the process. Obviously that will vary, but as a guide to help members sort of think whether that's the sort of time that you would be able to devote. But that's all I had to say really, but happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much. I see a hand up already. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. Why has this got to be a daytime meeting when that is restrictive on the diverse representation we have? It makes it really awkward or impossible for those of us who do have a daytime job to attend. I find that elitist and exclusive. Is there any reason why it can't be held in the evenings? Thank you, Chair.
I'll let Mrs. Wellman answer that one for you.
In terms of I'm concerned about the capacity of the team. They're obviously got masses on, but Ed has just said to me that if it is the members' will that they're in the evening, then obviously we will accommodate that. But I just ask members to be mindful of the fact that obviously there is a lot of work that the team are doing. So obviously the more evening meetings we're accommodating, that just has a pressure in the daytime work. So, but yeah, absolutely, whatever the wishes of the committee are.
Okay, thank you. I'll start outside the committee. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just fascinated, if this isn't going to make any decisions and it's only meeting every 2 or 3 weeks, what exactly is the point of it? You know, if you're not, you know, I don't understand. If you can't help them and assist them with making decisions or prioritising things, what's the point of it? And what benefit is it to anyone?
I think the benefit of it, and I was quite surprised when we didn't have a working group that was obviously following the progress, is obviously the ability to make sure that the committee, that the working group is satisfied that it's going in the direction that the committee have already deemed. So I mean, we've given an example of 2 to 3 weeks. It will depend on when there's, you know, things to report back on. So, you know, that is fluid, but that was just to give an indication to members of the likely timescales. But yeah, I mean, ultimately a matter, but I would expect whenever a council is going through a process such as this, that there would be informal meetings whereby the progress was being overseen so that you could be satisfied that things are on track, and also that nothing is coming into the committee that is coming to you as a surprise, that ultimately you're happy that it is going in the direction that it needs to be going.
So they're picking what's going to come to committee then and prioritising things?
No, they're making sure that the direction that committee has set, that everything is going in that direction and overseeing that progress.
But isn't that this committee's job? I mean, I'm sorry, if there's a need for more decisions, shouldn't this committee be meeting more often?
I think that's why this needs to be quite, in my view, ultimately you as members make the decision. But this is obviously a much smaller group. Committees are much more difficult to slot in, and therefore it just enables us to be a bit more flexible in the approach. But ultimately, you know, as members, you make that decision.
I'm obviously not a member, but I see the leader is becoming a member of this group, but he doesn't sit on this committee, does he?
I think when I was first asked if I'd like to take on strategic planning, it was put to me that we perhaps needed a more collegiate approach to strategic planning that is involving more members in just setting the direction as Melanie has said, ensuring what comes to committee it has been well looked at in advance, and we don't spring surprises or get things coming to us that we feel hadn't been properly scrutinised, which is a big job for myself and Mike, just as chair and vice chair, to look at. And I think it remains to be seen. I think it's like a lot of these things, you set up the committee and then it kind of finds its feet, finds its role, and you begin to appreciate what it's capable of. But feel free to comment on whether you think it's needed or not. But as Melanie has said, she was rather surprised that we didn't have a smaller group just overseeing the direction of the local plan and ensuring that it's coming through in a timely way. Okay, yeah, I'm going to move on to Councillor Brian Bailey. You had your hand up a while ago, Brian.
Right, thank you very much. Despite the comments from my colleague Councillor Barlow, I think this is a good idea, and I would like to be considered to be a member of the aforementioned committee. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. I think for me, something that struck me since this whole local plan started is the fact, and I think I joined this committee in about January 21, something like that, that there's never really been a kind of almost like a memorandum of understanding or the principles on which the membership want the local plan to be based. So, for instance, green wedges. I think that if the members of the committee had been asked whether we fundamentally wanted to retain or we were fine with getting rid of our green wedges, as a matter of principle, we would have said we want to keep our green wedges. But because that discussion had never taken place, we therefore got a report which we had a discussion about criteria, and then a report came forward which was not supported by the committee. And that's a classic example of if we'd had that discussion from the outset, all that work that was done, we would have steered the direction of travel of the work that was being done with the officers. And I don't think it just applies to green wedges. I think there's many other issues where we've gone launching into a huge amount of detail on different issues without standing back and actually looking at the key principles that matter to the members of this committee. And so I think that as a working group, it's absolutely vital that we don't go through that kind of green wedges process again. And we try through that working group, which I think is important. I think those discussions, as long as they're not decision making, we do need to make sure that members are driving forward and we're not just passively receiving these reports that then we suddenly go, no, well, of course we don't agree with that. So I think it is important to have those discussions. I think members must be shaping the local plan. And so I would be supporting of a working group, but it's really important that we look at the principles so that we don't have any more green wedge scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's a good example that you've chosen, and I think that is the purpose of this group, is to kind of get early warning of those things, because back in October, we agreed a methodology that seemed to make perfect sense, and then all of a sudden we were faced with the consequences of that, and officers had done a huge amount of work on it, and we did not like what we were then presented with, and that's a good example where a smaller group could have looked at it and said, we're not sure members are going to like the way this is going, maybe we need to look at that again. Okay, Councillor Olive.
Thank you, Chair. Is the intention that this is a open to the public minuted forum? No. I'm really struggling to reconcile this group not being a decision-making body with it holding progress on the local plan to account. I really, and forgive me if I'm being thick, that's been known to happen. Much like Councillor Barlow said, actually, I find myself more or less in complete agreement. I really don't understand what the point is. If surely kind of monitoring progress, holding the service for which the portfolio holder is responsible to the plans that have been set out falls within the normal responsibilities of the portfolio holder anyway. I just don't understand why this committee is being asked to set up a working group to that end.
Yes, and I can understand that there's a feeling that if it's not a decision-making group, what is it doing? But I think it's more a kind of steering group, if you like, that is not making decisions, but just ensuring that what comes to committee is appropriate. And as Councillor Bailey has said in the case of the green wedges, that we had been forewarned and maybe have taken a different approach. So it's not deciding what comes to committee, but it's ensuring that what does come to committee has been well agreed in advance. Yeah, do come back.
Genuinely forgive me if I'm being obtuse here, but I don't understand how a steering group preventing things that it doesn't think the committee is going to like coming to committee is not decision making. That sounds like a decision is being made.
Yeah, I see your difficulty. I mean, I think a group that is meeting and not making any decisions is pretty pointless. The point
but
is
then
that
it's a decision-making body, which is
well,
not being held in public, and it's not minuted.
I think the difference is what kind of decisions are being made. If the decisions that there's no intention that this I mean, I have yet to see how this all pans out, and I've not been hugely briefed on it either. But my feeling is that what it will do is just ensure that that the local plan is proceeding in the way that the majority of members want it to proceed. But that all the decisions that are actually made, such as we're going to make today, are made in committee. So it will make decisions, but they will not be decisions about what is actually coming to committee, or what is, what the decision is that the committee would actually have made. I think I'll go to Mrs. Wellman first to see if she can help me out.
Yeah, I was just
trying
going
to
add one
explain
point, 'cause,
something.
from an officer perspective, I very much see it as being that sounding board. So in between committee meetings, making sure that the direction it's going in is the directions that members are expecting it to be going in, so that we don't have the green wedge situation. So that sounding board part of it, from an officer perspective, is really quite important. But ultimately a decision for you as a committee.
My two penneth.
Yeah, please do.
I suppose my two penneth is that if you've got your working group and then officers come with suggestions as to what they're going to then bring to the full committee, then they know that they're speaking to the chair, the vice chair, 4 members as well of that committee and the leader. And if they get an absolute horrified response or what on earth are you doing, they know they're not pushing that much of an open door to bring it to committee. So they don't then do that. They get their ducks in a better row and they sort everything out before it comes. That's the way that I see that the working party, would be beneficial. More often than not, it will hopefully be the case that officers can report to members and say, this is what we're going to bring to the full committee, and to give a bit of background information, and members say, yeah, that seems to be what we want to look at next as well. And then the ultimate decision's made at the committee. It seems quite straightforward to me.
Thank you. I think it's useful to have an officer perspective here. Okay, I've got a range of hands up. I haven't heard from Councillor Ledger yet, so I'm going to go to you first, Councillor Ledger.
I tend to agree with Councillor Olive. As chair and vice chair, you have member briefings. You have briefings ahead of the agenda to act as that soundboard. If you don't like agenda items, you can ask the officers to pull them. And I personally would see that, Chair, as your role as the portfolio holder and as the chairman of this committee. If you don't feel that something is going in the right direction, that you have delegation of the committee really to ask the officers to pull those items and to steer it through the direction that the committee sets. I don't think that we need a formalised working party to do your role. I think you're empowered by this committee to do that.
Okay, thank you. And obviously you're speaking as a former chair. The only thing I would say is by the time Mike and myself see the agenda, it is a draft agenda, and officers have done a considerable amount of work to bring that even as a draft agenda. If we then say, well, let's pull this item, that may be several weeks of work for an officer thinking, what do I do now? Go on then.
If that's the case, then I think that you and the vice chair need to sit down with the officers with the work programme in front of you and then review that, just like the working party would potentially do. But I don't think that we need a separate group for that. If you wish to bring the leader in so that you've got a wider group working within it, I've got no issue with that. But I don't think we need to formalise it with a working group that there are those issues from the membership coming forward. It should be down to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hartnell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Olive, Councillor Ledger. I think it's dangerous territory to hold meetings behind closed doors with a select few members of this committee, which kind of creates a two-tier committee. Then you've got those that are influencing the papers that are coming through to the actual committee, and I think the fact that the public have no access to those meetings and the rest of us as members have no access to that meeting, I think is just dangerous in terms of how we would be perceived by members of the public. Just one question in terms of where this sort of idea or this concept has come from. Has it been driven by members, or is it officers that are asking for the working group? Which is it? Just for information, really. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's sort of come from senior officers and members, actually. Okay, I've got a number of other people wishing to speak, and I'll come back to you, perhaps, Melanie, for a sort of roundup on this. I think this perhaps is a good example of what we should have looked at in a working group before we brought it to committee, because it's very clear, and I did say members will be less concerned about the actual makeup of the group as its democratic role, so I anticipated some comments. Okay, I'm going to go firstly to people who haven't spoken and then come back to a couple who have already. So, Councillor Collins, please.
Thank you. I mean, my only concern really is in terms of capacity. So, obviously, we're sort of up against it in terms of meeting deadlines and things. I was just worried that we'd have enough sort of officer capacity as well as member capacity, as Councillor Ingham mentioned about it being in the daytime. I know I wouldn't be able to make it because of work. So I just wanted to check that we have the capacity, because I know in other committees we've tried to set up task and finish groups and things like that, and we've not had the capacity. So I was just wanted to make sure that it's a feasible thing before we decide to do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'll come back to Mrs. Wellman on that one as well. Councillor Parr, we haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I entirely agree with Councillor Olive and Councillor Ledger and Councillor Hartnell. I think it would be complete derogation of the chairman and the vice chairman's role. They are there to have a forward plan and to have these discussions with officers. And I really think to have a two-tier committee, I mean, it's just, and clearly it is going to make decisions, because it's going to say we're not sending that to committee and redo this. I mean, it is completely naive to say it won't make decisions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. I'm prejudiced because I spent many unpleasant years when I was working in the Dutch Ministry of Science writing national planning and development policies. And the only way really to get things going was to have a small working group that showed, as the monitoring officer, Mrs. Wellman tells us, shows the direction. You can cut all sorts of meetings short simply because people thought about what was going on. So I'm in favor of the proposal, just on the basis of my part. They were.
Thank you. Yeah, these buttons are very sensitive, aren't they? I keep pressing it and realising all I've got to do is touch it. So, okay. Thank you for that, and I'm going to come back to Councillor Barlow and then Councillor Ingham.
Thank you very much, Chair. I didn't know you were going to let me speak again, but thank you for doing that. I just think your reputation, you need to be careful that the last local plan was one of the reasons that perhaps all the independents got in was because it wasn't transparent, that it was behind closed doors, secret meetings made decisions. And here we are, doing exactly the same thing again. And I just, even just for the reputation of it, I think, and if you are going to do it, may I suggest that you open it up to all members? Why shouldn't everyone go along? You only have to, make a committee, but really you're basically saying, come along. You're not making decisions, but you can listen into, well, I don't know what you're going to listen into, but you will listen into something, not making any decisions at the time. So everyone should be able to go, and I don't see why it shouldn't be recorded. I just, don't understand. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Ingham. You want to come back in after it?
You were going for ones who haven't spoken, so that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Hayward then.
Thank you, Chair. It is fascinating listening to the debate because members speak and then other members come in and almost they're inadvertently contradicting themselves. You have a proposal that this sounding board is set up with a cross-party group to attend, with officers, with the chair, with the leader, the vice chair. Councillors can attend. Any councillor can attend any meeting of this authority. You can come and just sit in. And then you have this issue that it's undemocratic, it's done behind closed doors. But in the same breath, members are then saying that the chair and vice chair and an officer can have a briefing behind closed doors, almost in an autocratic way, and decide to pull items from the agenda. So by arguing that, you're actually saying, no, let's make it more undemocratic, whereas this is an opportunity to have a working group. And working groups are just part of councils. Everyone in here who sits on their own town and parish council and other authorities, this is the way life is in local government. a committee like this is here to make decisions. If you want to have all-day meetings every week to go through the minutiae of things, then so be it. But as other councillors have said, we just do not have. A lot of us are working people. We do not have the time to do this. Our time, it's not precious, but it must be utilised in a very worthwhile way. That's what we're elected to do. So I do find it strange that in one breath people are saying it's undemocratic, but then it's suggesting something that's actually more undemocratic. Working groups, there's an officer present, the minutes are noted. If anyone wants to come back to it, and if committee insists or demands, those notes can be made available. They have to have a record. It's no different to a members' advisory panel. That's why we have them, so that we do things. There is a record afterwards of what was discussed. But on this at the moment, and I take on board everything that's been said, I am finding that I'm in favour of this, as long as, like everything we try and do in this council, that it's cross-party. We have a collegiate approach to this, and I don't consider this to be a two-tier approach. It's a tool to help this committee's progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think in that case we can come back to Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. Traditionally, what we're considering now has been the work of the Chair and the Vice Chair, so let's make no mistake, this is a departure from that, but I totally agree with Councillor Haywood in that they're both behind closed doors, so let's not get political about that, it's nonsense. What we have to consider is that last month this committee was seen to make a profound error, okay? And we can't afford for that to happen because it's part of the emerging local plan and critical to our reputation. We all make mistakes, but let's try and only make one. And I think because of what you've said, thank you, Chair, and Councillor Howe didn't disagree, I think it's important that we do follow the use of a working group to make sure that we put this right and execute it to the end of the delivery of the emerging local plan. And if officers say that, you know, and we ignore it, why? They're definitely right. The leadership, we're told, of this council think it's the right thing to do. Just let's fix this. The Americans have that horrible cliche, if it ain't bust, don't fix it. Well, it's completely bust, so do fix it. Don't carry on blindly making the same error. We've got a good opportunity here to have a robust control and vetting of how this committee works over the next 18 months, 2 years. Please take that opportunity. Don't be foolish. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to come back to Councillor Howe and then I'll come to Mrs. Wellman to sum up.
I don't know, it's come back to me. I haven't spoken yet, but nevertheless, when this was put to me, I'm quite not fussed either way. I really don't mind either way. I have thought for a long time our briefings, our so-called confidential briefings, are too short, but that's more to workload, and it worries me that we're adding another workload in. And I think some of this could have been picked up in that meeting, and the leader is more than happy, I'm sure the chair would say, you know, to come to those briefings even. But I, at the same time, appreciate the insights of other councillors. I do have some concerns that we pick for other members, and it's not relevant to them. So I think there needs to be some flexibility about working. But as I say, I'm not worried. There is one thing that's been said, and throughout this, whoever we are, whether it's just the chair and the vice chair, or whether it's this group, the agenda lays with Mr. Freeman. He is the only person that can put it on and pull things from it. We, as chair and vice chair, can advise, warn, you know, that he's going to get opposition, but fundamentally it is Mr. Freeman's agenda, and we can't influence that in any other way. Just say, you sure you got this right? So to anyone that's worried about decisions being made behind scenes, no. All we can do is advise officers. It is the officers' agenda, and that's what we have to do. But as I say, I don't know which way I'm going to vote yet. I'm quite open. I'm not fussed either way. I really am not.
No, I agree with you there. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I do agree with Councillor Hayward and Councillor Ingham, because I think those discussions, you know, there are discussions going on behind closed doors that as a committee member I don't know anything about, that, you know, about the agendas before they come out. But I think I'd like to ask Melanie, please, how, if there is a working group, how will you make sure that you know, there is no suspicion that it's kind of, you know, behind closed doors? Will it be minuted? Will they be published? How will that work, please?
Okay, thank you. That's a good point to bring Mrs. Wellman in.
I mean, ultimately, it's a decision for yourselves. I was trying not to have it as a minuted meeting because we're then creating more of an industry. But if there are any actions coming out of the meeting, then clearly those would need to be recorded. So it could be, if members, it was acceptable to members, that we just have a list of any actions that come out of the meeting and anything pertinent. But I don't want to get into an industry of creating more work for the team over and above, obviously, what's already to do. But ultimately, you know, we're happy to take anything away that you want us to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we could take notes and just make sure that any decisions that have been made have been.
Thank you, Chair. I note the regret in your voice at having to bring me back in there. We have a leader and cabinet system of governance in this authority. It seems to me that what we're suggesting doing is, in the instance of strategic planning, is saying, well, actually, you know, sorry, Ollie, but you know, we're making you redundant. We don't think there's a point in having a portfolio holder anymore. It feels like that's what we're doing here. And, you know, if that's what we decide we want to do, fine. But if we do this, I'm left asking, and again, respectfully, Chair, what's the point of having the portfolio holder?
Standing orders, Chair. Can I call for a vote, please?
I'm going to let Councillor Levine come back, and then I think.
I was really going to make a proposal.
We need to proceed to
I would really like to say that I would like to put a proposal to the vote that accept the officer's recommendation.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. I'll bring Mr. Freeman in here.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, because a number of members have mentioned about capacity and officers' capacity to facilitate this. I mean, my hope is that ultimately it will save time by having this sounding board, and that ultimately it can stop us from potentially running down a rabbit hole or something in the wrong direction and keep us on track and guided by this group. I think the other thing that hasn't really been said is about joining up all of these different elements, because I'm very conscious of bringing these reports about specific elements of the local plan, but they're all interconnected fundamentally. And decisions in one area have impacts on decisions in another. And this is where I think this group could help to help members' understanding of the bigger picture, but how all of these things interrelate to one another and air those sorts of issues. And I think in terms of the role of the chair and vice chair, I don't think that changes. I see this group as about engaging a wider audience as well as the chair and vice chair. And it may be that members want a situation where it's not fixed in terms of those other members, that we engage with relevant portfolio holders where there are particular issues that affect their portfolio, or if it's issues in a particular area, that we engage with the ward members in that area, and that it's quite fluid in that sense, but that it gives us as officers that wider sounding board to just discuss ideas and issues, to engage a wider understanding from officers' perspective in members' views on those issues, and help members to get a better understanding of the issues from officers' perspective, to guide us in terms of what reports I'm then bringing through to the committee. Hopefully that helps.
It does, thank you very much. And in terms of the chair's role or the portfolio holder's role, I've never been very good at dictatorship. And when I make a decision on the rare occasions that I do, I know I don't think I do actually. I've never had to make a kind of delegated authority decision. But even autocratic dictators tend to have advisors around them, and I much prefer to make decisions with a group of people so I know I'm on the right track as well. So I suggest at this point we go to a vote as... yeah.
Please listen to Mr. Freeman and what he's asked you to do. Thank you.
Admirably brief. Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, could I just clarify actually, because looking at the recommendation, obviously we can put that forward that there's an informal working group of members to oversee development of the East Devon local plan, working group to made up of the leader, chair, vice chair of the strategic planning committee, plus 4 other members of the committee. The way that I see this, and I don't know whether other officers agree, is that we take a vote first of all on that proposal, and then do we then take a separate vote as to who those 4 other members will be to make up the working panel? Because at the moment, if not, we're going to get some comments that you're then deciding behind closed doors who the 4 members are going to be. Heaven forbid that happens. Again, thinking about it as you were all speaking, I'm thinking perhaps we may just, if God is on my side, have just 4 members who want to put themselves forwards and everybody's happy. If not, there may be 5 or 6 people, and we're going to have to whittle it down by voting as to who the panel, the committee want to have on the panel. So shall we just take it as we go? If we vote on the first thing first, then we'll see how many people we've got to put themselves forward to be members of the panel, and if we need to whittle it down as a committee to 4, then we can do that as well. Thank you.
Sorry, anyone can turn up. Councillor Hayward said that anyone can turn up for those meetings and they would be advertised regardless, so... Well, that's what we was said.
Yeah, I'll just get confirmation of that from Mrs. Wellman.
I don't think that's the proposal that you've got on the table, which is to go with the composition that it says in the report.
That's just the same as the chairs and vice chairs briefings, actually. Those are not held in public or... Well,
that's my understanding, but Councillor Hayward said it would be open to any member who could apply for it, or could go along, it would be advertised.
Okay, thank you for asking for clarification on that, because I think it will meet without other members present, but it will... we will take notes and any decision that's made, even if it's to steer the committee in a particular direction or to bring forward a particular bit of work, will be noted. Okay, so shall we take a vote on the principle of this first, and then, as Mr. Hunter has suggested, we'll see who's willing to be on this group, and we can take a vote on that.
Do the first bit first, and we'll worry about the second afterwards.
Well, we'll have to see whether the first bit's going to succeed, won't we?
Well,
yeah,
absolutely. I'm preempting the decision there, aren't I? Yes. Okay. So we have a proposer and seconder. So all those in favour of the recommendation. And those against? 1, 2.
2 against.
And abstentions?
1, 2, 3.
Okay.
So that is carried.
Okay. So the next part of this is...
Can I make a suggestion? I personally think it'd be better, now we know the principle's set, that we don't actually decide on the membership tonight. We ask the memberships, the committee, to put their names forward and bring it forward next time, or as soon as we can, or some other mechanism. It's just, if we start voting, if we get more than 4 and everything else, and I personally think there needs to be some merit in, when we know what we're discussing, you know, it's almost pointless having an Exmouth councillor on if it's something to do with Sidmouth, and we have no Sidmouth councillor. I think we need to be a bit flight of foot and be able to choose the councillors, not choose is the wrong word maybe, but help get the right councillors, in for the right things. Otherwise we'll be discussing things that has no relevance to those councillors selected. And I do think we need a bit more variable, so I just think we need to think a bit more about the second choice.
Well, sounds like a sensible suggestion, so long as those members are chosen from the whole committee and with the agreement of the whole committee. Councillor Ingham.
Chair, with regards to what time of the day the meeting is held, I'm quite happy for it to be held during the day. I just don't like the assumption when we start deciding that it will be during the day. So if you want it to be in the day, I'm not going to cause problems.
Okay, we usually hold the chair's briefing on Zoom or Teams anyway. It's usually a virtual meeting, so it's quite likely it would be a virtual meeting, which perhaps members, those who are working, sometimes find easier to join. But yeah, we might mix and match it a bit. I've got Councillor Olive, then Councillor Ledger.
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair. Does it not make more sense to have 4 standing members of committee and then just to invite ward members, portfolio holders, etc., as required, rather than chopping and changing membership of the working group as we go?
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Well, I think that's just one for us to take away, rather than put forward as a proposal to vote on. That we'll take it that the vote that has been taken is that there's a working group with those people listed, but the understanding is that that working group will be able to invite ward members if we feel that their input would be particularly valuable.
Chair, can I just jump in again at this stage? Can I just check with Melanie and with Ed? I appreciate you saying, Councillor, how that you want to bring another report back now to elect 4 members, but are we not, delaying things and we need to get this set up quite urgently, I would have thought, to get the local plan on track. So is it not, a suggestion from myself at the moment? Can we see whether we've got 4 people who want to put themselves forward? We might quite easily resolve this now. There may only be 4 people who put themselves forward. There may be 3. We don't know. Let's have a look. If there's going to be 5 or 6 who all want to put themselves forward and nobody's prepared to back down, maybe we can have a look at it again at that stage. But hopefully we can resolve it now.
Yeah. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let's do it then. Okay.
Got 2.
So, Councillor
Three.
Brian Bailey.
5.
I think it's most of the committee, isn't it?
There's 5 at
Councillor
least.
Jess Bailey.
Dan.
You can't vote to be on something you didn't want to exist.
Yeah, you can. They both can. Councillor Levine. Councillor Levine.
So how many have we got?
5.
I think it's got to be members of the committee, Ian. But we will invite you in if there's something relevant to Sidmouth, because we know you've got your ear to the ground there.
5.
Okay, who was the 5th?
Todd. Dan.
Oh, Dan. Right. Yep.
I've got Councillor Brian Bailey, Councillor Jess Bailey, Councillor Olive, Councillor Ledger, Councillor Levine.
Yep.
Anybody prepared to graciously back down? And
Yeah, Councillor Levine just has. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Thank you. Let's just look at... actually, that's quite good. We've got an Exmouth councillor. We've got a West Hill councillor. Your kind of Wimple area. And Councillor Ledger representing the eastern end. Seaton and sort of Axminster. That seems like quite a good geographical spread, and if we feel there are items, I like the idea of being able to invite in actually ward councillors if we feel that it's relevant for a particular item that may come up on the agenda. Okay. Thank you, Damien.
So, Chair, could we then basically say that the proposal now for the second thing, if I can just clarify, if someone wants to put this forward, but it could even be yourself, that we have the 4 standing members being Councillor Brian Bailey, Councillor Jess Bailey, Councillor Olive and Councillor Ledger, and that also the working group be able to invite ward members as they see fit when the occasion arises. Could we put that to the vote? The portfolio holders then.
We'll
Does somebody want to
register
put forward that
as-
as a proposal rather than myself, obviously?
Yeah, we'll make that a recommendation then. Yep, you were proposing, and a seconder, Councillor Hayward. Okay, all those in favour of those 4 members plus other invited members as needed. Okay, any against or any abstentions? 1 abstention. Okay, thank you very much, members. I think we had a good discussion there. It's not even 11 o'clock, in spite of the fact that Councillor Howe thought it was evening already. It must have been up all night, that's all I can think. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, just before we do move on, Wendy's not quite got who voted then, and again, I saw that there was 1 person who abstained, but I didn't know whether there's anybody else.
Councillor.
Is everybody else, did they all vote in favour? Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just Councillor Hartnell abstained. Okay, so agenda item 7, proposed employment sites for consultation, and we've heard from a member of the public already on how important those employment sites are. And it is obviously something that we want to support. We want to support a thriving business community. And as he's pointed out, it's also essential for our income. So we'll go over to Mr. Freeman to tell us about the employment site.
Thank you, Chair. So, members will be a previous consultation on the draft local plan included some employment sites that were proposed for allocation. But since that time, further sites have been assessed, and work on the Greater Exeter Economic Development Needs Assessment has given us a clearer steer on the employment land needs across the area. So the picture in terms of identified need and current supply of employment land is summarised in the report for members' information. The Economic Development Needs Assessment identifies a need for 80 hectares of additional employment land, with an accompanying assessment of the market that was undertaken at the same time, showing a need based on inquiries to the agent who was undertaking that work of around 50 hectares. So the economic modelling work undertaken as part of the Economic Development Needs Assessment is designed to take account of current and future needs. But we've obviously got these 2 different documents now, also with the market assessment. So the advice we've been given by the consultants undertaking that work is that you don't add the 2 together. What we have is a situation where the Economic Development Needs Assessment says 80 hectares. If you add the 2 together, we've got a total need of 130. The need is somewhere between the 80 hectares and the 130, but we shouldn't be adding the 2 together. So what we've tried to do in terms of looking at employment land is you'll see that the report sets out a range of options in terms of employment sites that could meet both the lower end of that need and the upper end of that need assessment. So the remainder of the report looks at the potential allocations. These could come from carrying over land allocated in the current local plan that's not yet come forward, but we need to be satisfied that those sites are still viable and deliverable. Are there reasons why they haven't come forward that might lead to us not wanting to allocate them again? Other sites have been submitted in one of the call for sites exercises for this plan or in response to the draft plan consultation last year. So Appendix 1 to the report sets out the complete picture of employment sites for consideration for allocation in the local plan, including those proposed to be carried over from the existing local plan, those previously consulted on, and those that are now proposed to be consulted on. It can be seen that this leads to a total of 119.48 hectares, with an additional 35.9 hectares coming forward at Cranbrook and the second new community within the plan period. So what we've done is taken the total land budget for the second new community and then pro-rated out the employment land that would come forward alongside the 2,500 homes that are planned during this planned period in the second new community. So that gives us a total of about 155 hectares of potential employment land coming forward in the district, or a pool of sites to choose from when members are making decisions on actual allocations, because at this stage we're just seeking to consult on these sites and our assessments. So Appendix 2 to the report sets out our assessment of the sites that's proposed to consult on now, and some wording for the consultation and draft wording of policy. As I say, these sites would give us adequate employment land to meet the needs of the district, with members then having the opportunity to determine which of them goes forward into the publication draft of the plan once consultation responses have been received and members have had an opportunity to consider the responses. It should be noted, however, that the assessment of site reference GH/ED/43 requires some updating to reflect the works recently completed to Long Lane. This is a site next to Power Park on Long Lane near the airport. Identified that it doesn't reference the fact that the works at Long Lane have now been completed and consequential changes to the bus routes in that area. So I would ask for delegated authority to make some minor updates to that assessment prior to the consultation going out. So turning to the recommendation, members are therefore asked to agree to consult on the employment sites detailed in this report as part of the Reg 18 addendum consultation planned to start in April, now not the end of March as detailed in the report, and to give delegated authority to myself to make minor updates and corrections to the site assessments prior to the consultation going live. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for, yeah, Peter? Councillor Faithful. Oh, you need to get to a microphone. Yeah. There you go.
Oh, there, right. Is that on? All this going on around Exeter just concerns me. We've just been, one of the subjects you've been talking about is all this fuss about green wedges. And there seems to be an awful lot around Exeter as a creep from Exeter closing the gap between Exeter and the rest of East Devon. And it's quite clear that certainly at Soughton there's what was a green space is planned to be built on. And I'm just really concerned that we're starting to break down what we've been working on for all these green spaces all around the place. That's my concern, particularly the suggestion of the green, whether it's a green wedge or a green belt around Exeter, and this is just going to undermine it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernley.
Thank you, Chair. As the parish councillor for Broadclyst, I see we have 6 development sites within my ward, which is quite entertaining. I understand the problem of building on the green belt, and a nod to Councillor Faithful, but we have got so much housing built in that area that we need to have jobs for the people to go to, for it to be close to where people live. So I think it's important that we are looking at sites close to where people live. I'm sure Broadclyst Parish Council will be looking at this in great detail and commenting back. So, you know, it's good that we've got all these opportunities to comment on this. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, that's the purpose of the consultation, is to get feedback, because we can assess those sites, but we can't necessarily. Yeah, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak on this item, but I feel I need to put another perspective on the proposals for Greendale expansion. The extension to the business park includes the NHS inoculation centre, which is alleged to be only used for emergency site for the NHS, so that area needs to be discounted. It also includes an area of Hogsbrook that is already approved, so again, that needs discounting out. It does not include the attenuation and drainage requirements for these new proposals, nor the landscaping proposals, nor the highway and parking facilities. So the company's estimate of increasing the workforce by over 1/3 seems very optimistic. The applicant discusses 10 acres of landscaping, but no details of where. Is this included in the 34 acres or another 10 acres? They say it will be minimal impact, but the locations are on rising land. The increase from business rates will be achieved no matter where the employment sites, but it would be better for the businesses and for the council, for those to be in the enterprise zone. The communities of Woodbury, Exton and Woodbury-Salterton already perform well on employment, with Greendale, Mill Park, Woodbury Business Park and the Marine Camp providing well over 3,500 employee places. Woodbury-Salterton is a small village of 250 dwellings. It is already swamped by Greendale and their 2,000 employees, and this proposal would only increase the negative impacts of the business park on this community. So on behalf of the residents I represent, I believe that the suggestion of Greendale Business Park being expanded further would be not beneficial to that village or the district, because businesses should be spread throughout the district and not just in a couple of places. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Young. Well, you've decided what you're going to say to the consultation, aren't you? And no doubt Woodbury Parish Council will have similar comments. Councillor Bethany Collins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree with Councillor Fernley in the sense that with all of the housing that's being sort of built and developed at the moment, we do need corresponding employment land. And looking at Appendix 1 in the report, a lot of the proposed sites for consultation are either undeveloped parts of existing land or extensions to existing land. And so I think that with sort of Councillor Faithfull's points about building on sort of the green areas, it's kind of the lesser of two evils in the sense of there's already sort of pre-existing sites, so sort of tagging them onto the end isn't necessarily as bad as just plopping a new industrial sort of site into a new green space. So I think that as much as we want to protect our green spaces, we do have to look on sort of the balance here, and if we're going to build more houses, we have to have the corresponding employment land. So I think that, and obviously it's up for the public to tell us what they think of it, so I think we do have to go out to consultation, and then sort of go from their comments and what the public think, rather than sort of, I guess, arguing about it now. I think we have to go through the process. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. By and large, for the main, I take on board the recommendations on each site and how they've been assessed by our officers. The one I disagree on is, in fact, the Greendale site. And you said perhaps, Councillor Young will be able to put his point across in consultation, and Woodbury similar. They may put forward their comments, but they wouldn't be similar comments to Councillor Young, because they've told me they won't be. And they actually asked me to speak up on behalf of this particular site, because they do understand its significance, they understand the success rate there, but most important of all, if we have a new community adjacent to that, we want to stop commuting, and by increasing this site and the other four that are adjacent to hopefully option 1, if that goes forward, then we're doing all the right things. And well, you heard what the spokesperson for Greendale said this morning. This is live data for us, isn't it? And this isn't something we have to wait for. We know that this would work. So I do disagree with Councillor Young on this particular site. I think it is appropriate, and Woodbury asked me to tell you that on their behalf. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to get into too much discussion on particular sites because obviously we're not planning committee. All we're doing is approving those to go out to consultation, and whether the discussion on whether they form part of an allocation in the local plan will come later. Okay, Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked through these existing and proposed employment site allocations, and I must admit I am very surprised that Greendale is not on there as a recommended site. Can I just confirm, is it going out to consultation, Ed? Will it be? It will go out to consultation, even though you're going to say it's not suggested we allocate it. I just think looking at them, you know, you've got Sidmouth in there with 2 sites that you say are deliverable, and yet the owners of the sites are not going to be delivering them. They've already put it up for sale as residential. Now, I know that needs planning and all sorts of things, but that isn't a deliverable site. I've just spoken to the member for Fennerton about the site in there that is on there, and he doesn't know anything about it, and it's very, according to him, very productive land, whatever, and looking at the access of it, you know, 4.6 hectares, it just seems unbelievable that you have a site that is that you could negotiate with to make improvements to what the land has been put forward. Why would you try and put it somewhere else in a green belt, in a green area that you're not, because you've already got something there? And I just think that and it's deliverable. It will be delivered. So I'm very shocked that it's not in there, not recommended. And, you know, I know from planning, well, I do sit on planning, the amount of times where we have said we'd like to pass something. It's been discussed to pass something, but we've been told it's not in the local plan. We must go to this. This is the only way to change it. Here we are trying to change it, or they're trying to change it, and now we're not even recommending it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think it will be possible to put those forward in consultation. So we'll see what the results of those are. Okay, I've got Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at the map on Appendix 2, the one thing that's striking is all the employment sites are to the west. There's nothing except for Ottery 20 resembling in the east. So the impression that I get is, if I were to look, when looking at it, is saying, we are abandoning the economic development of the eastern part of East Devon and putting all our money into benefiting from Exeter. Are we really depriving east of East Devon of employment opportunities?
I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on that one because I think that's a valid point. Okay, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst Mr. Freeman's making some notes, it's just one question. I mean, I'm through you. I would like this question to be put. You know, we're being asked, do we want to go out to consultation? I think that's clear. We'd like the public's feedback, the parish council's feedback, the business community's feedback. That's important. That's how we gather evidence in. So I'll be supporting this when the vote comes around. It's just a question, if I may, through Mr. Freeman, just for a point of clarity. On page 54, 55, and 56, 57, 58, there's 2 sites, the M5 near Poltimore, Polt 4 and 6. Just some clarity, because there's 2 separate sites, but of course each one overlays the other. And just some clarity, if everyone came back and said, we want number 4, but number 4 contains part of number 6 and vice versa, and why they're both in there, why you just couldn't merge them all and call it Polt 7. Thank you.
Okay, I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on those as well. Councillor Ledger.
Thanks very much, Chair. Councillor Levine pretty much took the words out of my mouth. One of the things I do want to highlight to the committee, under Appendix 1 it says land north of Seaton, east of Harepath Road. It's part of a much larger mixed-use scheme. This committee, throughout the last consultation, recommended housing to be put on there. So you're taking the mixed-use scheme away, and this is a much smaller area because apparently it was undeliverable. We are having consultations in the town for a new development that's hopefully going to come through planning relatively soon, showing that it is developable. And so those two areas aren't really meeting, and they're not really coherent. We've currently, so if you go by the one of the appendixes, forget the name of it, under the employment land review, we've got 40 hectares that have got planning permission. We've got 60 that are allocated. What's the current unmet need of the district? That's a question for Mr. Freeman. And then what do we envisage from this next local plan that we will need to allocate? Because that's not been mentioned, I don't think, at any point. Taking into consideration, obviously, pressures from Exeter and what they're doing, there's talk of them developing on a lot of their employment land, and then that is going to give extra pressures to East Devon. And I don't know if we are going to take the view that we are looking at it solely for East Devon, or we're going to take it on a wider than the district level, that we're going to acknowledge that there are going to be pressures coming from other districts, and that may have to change our tact and what we do to deliver for the people, not just in our area, but across the kind of group. I don't want to use Greater Exeter, but across the Greater Exeter area. I think we need to really have that joint up thinking, and that's something that we need to take on board, and it's something that I'd like to see come forward at committee. Just to clarify on the Greendale Street, because I don't see it under the appendix for existing and proposed sites. That is the 2021 list, isn't it? So is that currently allocated? Because I don't see it mentioned within the appendix itself. So that, can I just get some clarity on that as well? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple more speakers, and then I'll come to Mr. Freeman for some answers on those questions. Some good questions there. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. It's hardly worth sitting down for this. So, totally agree with Councillor Levine and Councillor Leisure for what it's worth. But I'm sorry I was late for the meeting. I had to do something else. Just like to ask Damien, because I missed any declarations at the beginning of the meeting. Were there any declarations from any of the committee in relation to any of the sites? Thank you. I'd have made it by now, Damien, if I had.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, and I want to agree with Councillor Levine and the others that have spoken about that. We are very one-sided. The only other point is, and it's a typo error, I believe, or whatever. A number of these reports on each of the individual sites has a within Green Wedge an adopted local plan and no answer, whereas some have, most haven't, and it's an interesting one. We should have the relevant information to know what we're exactly doing. I think there's about 4 that haven't got that question answered, which we should know about. I want to pick up on Soughton allocation. I'm trying to find it in because it is different. It is a green wedge. It is part of the Cliffs Valley Country Park, but we need to go out to consultation. I'm quite happy for that, but it is isolated. It is the wrong side of the road, if you get my meaning. But as I say, I've been saying that for a long time. We'll take it on the nose and go for consultation, then argue about it afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure we've still got a lot of work to do on this. Do we have any more speakers? No. Oh, Councillor Bailey. Brian.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't declare anything at the beginning of the meeting because I didn't consider it to be necessary, but the leader has just reminded me that, like many other members of the committee, I've been lobbied by an email from Greendale. So I think that's worth mentioning because nobody else has mentioned it. We've all received it. I get to the nitty-gritty. The reason why, it's quite simple, the reason why there's no major development to the east of East Devon is because there's no suitable traffic link. The reason it's all at the west of East Devon is because we're right on the M5 and everything comes on a truck. So if a truck can go somewhere near Exeter, Greendale, Hill Barton, for example, that's where they'll go. They're not going to drive halfway to Lyme Regis because it takes time and money. And the road conditions really aren't up for it, to be honest with you. So that, I think, is one of the main reasons why we haven't got development there. Now, Greendale has its praises sung. It's been rapped on the knuckles over the years. We all know that. However, it's well established. It does employ people who are working within large international and national companies. It's not, as far as I can ascertain, employing the people who are there, employing people on minimum wage, that sort of thing. They're good, professional, paying jobs, which is essential for our residents. Also, the access to Greendale is very good, up at the top of the road on the Sidmouth Road, whereas some of these others I've seen, one in particular, there was going to be a substantial amount of money paid for, they were hoping, by Devon County Council to improve the access to a relatively small site. Well, Devon County, as we all know, is not exactly overflowing with spare cash, so that's aspirational, it's not a fact. Whereas the fact is that Greendale is accessible very easily off the motorway, 10 minutes, even if it's slow traffic. So it's got a lot going for it. I'm looking at it purely objectively, and I, like Councillor Barlow, I'm surprised it's not on the list, and like Councillor Ningham as well. It should be on the list, in my opinion. Now, whether it goes any further than being on the list is not for us to decide, but it should be there and go through the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Olive. There's a little flurry of hands there. So.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Getting away from the minutiae, I don't think I've heard anything that makes me think we couldn't go to Reg 18 consultation on this, subject to giving Ed some delegated authority to make some appropriate changes. So in view of that, Chair, I'd like to propose the recommendation in the report and that we provide delegated authority to the Assistant Director to make minor changes and modifications prior to publication.
I'll second that, Chair.
Yeah, I think there are probably a few things that need tidying up based on what people have said. Okay. Councillor Jess Bailey.
No, I was only going to say that I think either we're talking about the merits of the different sites or we're not. And I don't think we should be singling out one particular site to be talking about the merits of it particularly. So I think I would agree that it would be appropriate to decide whether we're going to go out to consultation or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bethany Collins.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, so we're not discussing the merits of particular sites, just whether they should go out for consultation. Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Freeman to answer some of the questions raised.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just for complete clarity, the intention is to consult on all of the sites, regardless of whether officers feel they're acceptable or not, so that we can gather in views from the landowners, other parties, stakeholders, the communities affected, and then bring all of that information to members to then decide what actually goes in the plan. So there will be opportunities to comment on those sites, including Greendale. In terms of Polt 4 and 6, I understand they were put forward as two separate parcels. They're both in relation to service station proposals that would need to be accessed off the M5, which is a large part of the concern. So they're in there because they were put forward separately, fundamentally. And we have to consider them on that basis, but I don't think you could necessarily merge them. In terms of the West End emphasis, I think partly that's a reflection of the sites that have been put forward through the call for sites process. We can then deal with the sites that are put forward to us. But I would emphasise that if you look at the table in Appendix 1, you'll see some of the sites we consulted on with the draft local plan were more on the eastern side of the district. There's two quite large sites in Axminster in there. There's a site in Honiton in there, substantial site in Honiton in there. So there is a bit more of a spread in terms of that when you look at the bigger picture of all of the sites. I appreciate in terms of the sites we're now looking to consult on, because these are just ones we haven't consulted on previously. There is very much a West End emphasis to that, but the overall picture is a bit of a better spread. The other thing to bear in mind is also that if members think back to the draft local plan, there were a number of mixed-use allocations within the towns across both the western part of the district and the eastern part of the district, where we envisaged mixed-use developments of housing, but also with employment land alongside those housing parcels, with community facilities as the larger scale allocations in the town. So I hope that that would deliver some employment land in the eastern part of the district as well. I'm very conscious we need to do that. As has been said, we need to deliver jobs alongside homes and not just in the west end of the district. I think one of the questions was about the current unmet need. I'd refer back to the economic development needs assessment. The difficulty is these things are always a snapshot at a point in time, so it is very difficult to say. The market assessment that was done at that time, which identifies a need of 80 hectares, was done by the agents JLL at that time, but even they emphasise it was a snapshot in time in 2021, I think, and they would say that there was a sort of peak in demand post-COVID, so whether that reflects the current picture is difficult to say. All I'm saying is I think in terms of the economic development needs assessment, we've got this modelled need, and then we've got potentially some latent demand in terms of current demand that perhaps doesn't capture. And we need to look at the overall picture in terms of, yes, we need to meet the need coming from the economic development needs assessment. We probably need to allow an allowance for previously unmet needs that are in the market at the time of the plan, and plan for more than just the economic development needs assessment modelling need. But it wouldn't be correct to add the two together and come up with 130. The need is somewhere between the 80 and the 130, if that makes sense. I don't think that's necessarily something we need to decide today. I think we're consulting on a suitable pool of sites to meet the need, whatever end of that spectrum we come out at. But I think there's further work my team need to do with economic development team to come back to you when we've done this consultation and say this is what we think is the right quantum of employment land to be allocating at that time. In terms of Greendale, there are no allocations in the current local plan for Greendale. Deliberately, there were concerns for a number of reasons, including the landscape impact of development at Greendale at that time. So that's something we need to review through this process in terms of whether or not members feel that it is appropriate to make allocations there. But again, we will be consulting on that site as part of the consultation. Let's get the feedback and we can bring that issue back to members to consider alongside all of the other employment sites that are before you. I think the only other thing was picking up on Councillor Howe's point. Yes, happy to look at the issue about the question that is unanswered in some of the assessments, and appreciate the delegated authority to do that bit of tidying up across the assessments before it goes out. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think if we have no more speakers, we're ready to go to a vote. The recommendation is just that SPC agree to consult on the employment sites detailed in the report as part of the Reg 18 addendum consultation, planned to start at the end of March, now the beginning of April, I think. Yes, we'll get feedback on those sites, and then I'm sure we'll have a big bit of work to do to decide exactly which sites should go forward as preferred allocations in our local plan. And we've also given delegated authority to Mr. Freeman to make some minor changes to the consult or to the plans before the consultation goes out. So if we could have a proposer, I'm happy to propose from the chair.
It's already been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's been proposed by Councillor Oliver and
Oh.
seconded by Councillor Ingham.
oh, right, you're ahead of me. In that case, all in favour?
Human, yep.
Yep, unanimous. Good. Okay, thank you very much, members. And yes, I think we should have a quick comfort break here, shall we say? Come back at 25 to 12, just under 10 minutes. Okay, I think we're missing Councillor Hartnell.
Councillor Fernley's.
Oh, we're missing a few actually. Councillor
there's a few,
Ledger.
isn't there? Quick start. We'll get it over and done with.
To Councillor Ledger. It's possibly.
I saw him. He was searching for some tea and coffee.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
I did have a look.
Okie doke. Right, so we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the designated neighbourhood area housing requirement in the new local plan. Extensive reports there, so I'll go over to Mr. Freeman to summarise it all for us.
Before we do, because he's not going to be able to take part in the discussion and vote, so are we going to give him a minute or?
We have.
He's had 6 now.
No, that's fair enough. I was only just double checking with you.
Okay, over to Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be brief because, as you say, there's a lot of detail in the report, but members did have a previous report at their meeting on the 13th of February. Members agreed to consult on 2 reasonable alternatives for calculating the designated neighbourhood area housing requirement figures. These were both based, if members recall, on a supply figure to include all homes planned for in those areas over the planned period, with one option being that this includes a windfall allowance figure and the alternative option being without a windfall figure. Based on members' previous decision, consultation material has been developed to set out in plain English these options and suitable policy wording. These are detailed in Appendix 1 to the report. Figure 2 within the appendix also sets out a summary table of the figures for each designated neighbourhood area within the district based on the current evidence. However, it should be noted that this will need to be updated for the publication draft of the plan, but it does give an indication of the likely figures for each area. So hopefully that will help to inform the consultation and aid people's understanding of the methodology that's proposed and the two options. Accompanying this at Appendix 2 is a technical report which sets out the context for this work, the national policy position, how this has been dealt with elsewhere, lessons learned from elsewhere, and an assessment of each of the options as they would relate to East Devon. Appendix G to that report also sets out in greater detail for each designated neighbourhood area how the figures have been calculated, showing which sites have been included to come up with the figures in the summary table. Should be noted that this work has so far only been done for those areas that are already designated neighbourhood areas, and it's not proposed to do this for areas that are not currently designated, although we can do so. And obviously, as areas are designated through the plan period, we can provide them with this information to inform production of the plan, but there's no requirement to prepare figures in advance of designation. So members are asked to endorse this work for publication and consultation as per the detailed recommendations in the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And there's a lot of detail and some, well, I want to commend whoever put the report together with the kind of evidence base that we're going to need of all the kind of alternatives that have been explored and looked at, because I think there's a lot of very useful detail in that. So, Councillor Young.
Just a bit of clarity. There are some sites that are very close to another town. For instance, there's some sites on the edge of Lympstone and between Lympstone and Exmouth. Are they counted as Exmouth sites, or are they counted as Lympstone sites? And also there is another site on the other side of Lympstone that right on the boundary of Lympstone parish, but it's a Woodbury site. So now, is that counted as part of Lympstone? No, there's just a few like that which are a bit of a query for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on that, but I think it does state somewhere that all the sites, all the DNAs, is it, designated neighbourhood area, coincide with parish boundaries. So it presumably will depend which actual parish they fall within. Any other? Councillor Olive.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I second your comments on the quality of what's in front of us here. My only observation is in Appendix 1, the consultation material summary. I think it's really important that we're absolutely clear that the figures we're proposing aren't going to require any more houses, any more sites to be designated within neighbourhood areas than we already expect are coming forward. I think it's really, really important to make that point, to make sure our communities don't think that we're now saying, you know, we're going to designate a whole load of sites and we also expect you to do a whole load too. I think it's really important that we make that point.
Yeah, I think that, I think that's a very good point, actually. We do need to make sure that when these go out to consultation, that it is really, really clear how these figures have been arrived at and why they are the way they are. And I just remind members that we do need to consider whether to include or exclude windfalls. The proposal is, or the recommendation is, that we exclude windfalls because it's very hard to put a number on those. But there's also the consideration that if we don't do that, then some communities could end up seeing more sites coming forward, because if the allocated sites are in the local plan and then some windfall sites come up, then that could end up with an increase in the number of sites. It all depends obviously on the size of those windfall sites. If they're fairly small and insignificant, it's not going to make a lot of difference, but if a big windfall site comes forward, it could make quite a difference. Councillor Jess Bailey, do I see your hand?
Thank you. I really quite struggled to follow this report, I have to say. But I would like to ask, please, the figures that are in the chart, are you saying that if sites come forward preemptively, does that figure stay the same or does it change? In other words, if a site has come forward that planning permission has already been granted, does that mean there'll have to be another allocation? Yeah. So, for instance, there's a site in West Hill that was a green site that has had a resolution. I think it was a green site, has had a resolution to grant planning. Does that mean that West Hill is going to get even more houses for every application that's approved, if there are, for that one or for any others? Does that mean that our figure will just keep going up and up and up and up?
I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on that one, because it's a valid point. Yes, Councillor Faithful.
I'm just a little bit puzzled how we're supposed to work with a neighbourhood plan, but certainly, I mean, I haven't really looked at other places, but Octree, it seems to be going in contrary to the neighbourhood plan, the present neighbourhood plan. This is, I don't know, that's how I see it anyway.
Okay, thank you. I'll get Mr. Freeman perhaps to come back on that one. I know officers have tried to take note of neighbourhood plans, and there was some discussion about whether allocations in neighbourhood plans should count or not. Councillor Rickson.
Looking at the proposed housing for Axminster, this is absolutely horrendous. If you look at that, that's 1,545, yet according to the 2021 census, there were 3,700 households in Axminster. So that's a 42% increase. Is that really what they're proposing? I'd also like to point out that East Devon has had a population change overall of 13.8%, whereas the average in the southwest is 7.8. I mean, this is just unsustainable, isn't it, at this level?
Okay, thank you.
Can I just...
yeah, go on, Peter, and then we'll...
Just to say, we've just been talking in the previous agenda item about employment and all the employment in the West End, and now we're putting so many houses across the East End. So where are they going to get the jobs, Chair?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to disappoint you by not speaking. I just wanted to say that in the Sibeth allocation, obviously 068 is in the green wedge, and I just wonder if that makes any difference to our previous talk about green wedges, if we're going back to that, or if that is now in there and that is the end of it. That's the one just between Sidford and Sidbury.
Okay, I'll get Mr. Freeman to comment on that one. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. If you look at the figures for the ward that Jeff Young and I represent, which is 4 villages, 2 significant, Woodbury and Limpston, you look at the figures, then have a look at the figures for, say, Sidmouth in comparison, have a look at the figures for Seaton. You know, is part of the strategy to have no control, or is it to be disruptive, completely disruptive to those two villages? I think we have to consider also, when we're looking at the coastal preservation area, that that should be sacrosanct unless there's a specific reason for one area to be developed, which we'll discuss in the next item. But I am really concerned about those figures, you know, as someone's just said. And I think it was, you know, Yehudi pointed out to us in the last item on the agenda, you know, we were top heavy with economic allocations in the West End. Are we also going to be that disruptive with housing allocation? We did have a hierarchy which I didn't agree with, which put Exmouth at the top, and then compared with the last local plan, we forced in to the next tier villages like Woodbury and Limpston. But you're going to destroy them if you expand them at the rate that's being suggested here. And this is serious business. We have to look at these figures and not just say, well, we decided on the hierarchy, so that's what it will be. If that hierarchy delivers figures that we feel are unacceptable, now we have to say, and I'm pointing that out, Chair, because I think the figures are too high for those villages, especially when you compare them with towns that are way bigger than they are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I was reading one of the comments on the various other local plans that have been looked at, and I noted that I think it was one of the inspectors said it's fairly obvious that local people don't want any more housing. I mean, obviously he realised that's not a position a local plan can take. We do need to remember that a lot of this is underpinned by pretty solid evidence, and the reason Limpston does get quite a large allocation, and I totally understand your concerns, but it is based on the fact that Limpston is a service village with good connections and a reasonable range of services. But I don't want to get into that too much now, because we are talking about going out to consultation on these once again, not on actually deciding the merits of the various sites. And again, this is a conversation we're going to have on another day. Do we have any? Yes, Councillor Olive.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, a clarification question for Ed. I think what we're being asked to consult on here is the methodology by which we're proposing to calculate the designated neighbourhood area housing requirements, and therefore if at a later date we decide that, oh, that site's not appropriate, we're going to put growth there instead and shifty things around, the numbers that actually end up going into the Regulation 19 plan as a result of this methodology will change too. So we're not actually being asked to make any decisions about what we are and aren't going to build and where today.
I think that's right, but I'll get Mr. Freeman to comment on all of those.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. That is exactly right. So these figures are a snapshot in time of the position as it stands now. Obviously, if you decide to allocate fewer sites in Axminster in the future, then the Axminster figure will proportionately come down. But proportionate will have to allocate more elsewhere, so other figures will go up. So it's a moving feast, and it will move again depending on more immediate decisions as well. I think Councillor Barlow raised the point about the site in the Green Wedge between Sidford and Sidbury. Yes, that is currently in here, but if, when members reconsider the Green Wedges issue at your next meeting, decide that that site should be Green Wedge and shouldn't be considered as an allocation, then it would need to come out of these figures. So it's very much a moving feast, but it's important. Well, we felt it was important, and I think members did, when you considered this at your last meeting, to have illustrative figures in here to help people to understand the methodology. But it is the methodology that we're consulting on. It's just, as recent experience has shown, sometimes you need to see it work through for the methodology to come alive to people and people to understand how the methodology actually works. So yes, coming back to Councillor Jess Bailey's point, likewise here, you know, this is showing a fixed point in time. It's a snapshot in time. If sites don't come forward, there's no onus on that community to allocate to make up for that site. This is the philosophy behind this is to reflect the position. These are the sites that are currently proposed to be allocated, currently have consent in those areas. And so we're showing that as the figure, but there's no onus on any of these communities to actually allocate anything additional to this, or if sites don't come forward for whatever reason, there's no need to make up that proportion necessarily. So, but it's very much a moving feast. I think is the key thing to remember. There will change as work progresses on the local plan. So I'm just looking back through my notes in case I've missed anything. Coming back to Councillor Young's point, yes, I mean the sites are shown based on the neighbourhood area that they are within. So I think in your ward, obviously the sites in Limpston are within the Limpston parish, so they're counted as part of the Limpston designated area. But Limpston site GD/EH/72 is actually in Woodbury parish, so that counts to the Woodbury. So it's not, because it's not in the Limpston designated neighbourhood area. So yes, it's very much on the boundaries. If something's on the edge of a boundary, it's whatever neighbourhood area it's actually within, even if it may be growth for an adjoining settlement, which I think is your point. Hopefully that picks up on all the points so far. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Brian Bailey. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid it's going to be an old chestnut, Chair. Here we are discussing the number of houses we should be building in our area, where only a matter of weeks ago this authority had a vote of no confidence in South West Water. So we admit in one hand that we have no confidence in the company that is supplying our sewerage and drainage, and then on the other hand we're still planning ahead to put more houses in. Now I'm asked on a daily basis, I'm sure a lot of you are, why are you putting more houses in East Devon when they can't cope with the sewage that we've got? And we're having thousands of hours a year of raw sewage going into the sea and flooding in the inland valleys, such as where the Deputy Chairman lives. This is flooding on a regular basis. So it rather beggars belief from myself, members of the committee, I'm sure, and the general public especially, of why don't we stop. Many years ago, as I mentioned before, there was a building embargo in East Devon until South West Water did the clean sweep.
Sewage embargo.
Yeah, and the housing embargo, we weren't building houses for about 4 or 5 years until South West Water put a pumping station in Budley and it linked it up to a new one in Fair Park, and they spent millions and it took several years to fix it. And then when it was fixed and working adequately, then we started giving planning permission for houses. Now, that makes sense. It's logical, it's sensible. Whereas all the time and effort that's being spent doing this, we're just literally digging our own watery grave. And I find it mind-boggling. And I'm sure you, as a resident of Exmouth, Chair, have been asked this question many times. And it keeps coming up and coming up. And it seems to the general public think, well, what are they doing over here? You know, it's a mockery. It really is. And I think the answer is to stop building altogether. I'm sure Mr. Freeman will come along with some very good reasons why we shouldn't. But if we don't make a stand, that's where we'll be knee-deep in effluent. And it won't take long. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think... when are we expecting the water cycle study, Ed?
Knew that was coming.
Well, I just... Ah, right. Okay, who's brought the TARDIS? Okay.
Let him answer.
Yes.
Is there a serious answer to the question?
There is. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a discussion had when the water cycle study comes forward, and I think you might have seen. Okay. I've been.
Yeah, so we should have the water cycle study very soon. What we're trying to do is set up a position whereby the consultants who have undertaken that work can come in and present their findings to members. And that will give members an opportunity to understand firsthand from the consultants the work that they've undertaken, ask any questions, get clarification, and that can then lead into conversations with South West Water about how they address the issues arising from that study and how we build in capacity for growth moving forwards. So that's the plan. We're trying to set all of that in place and get invitations out to members hopefully shortly. Well, so I'm waiting to hear back from the consultants with a quote for them coming in and doing that, and potential dates when they're available. And once we've got those, we'll set something up and send an invitation out.
May I suggest, with respect, the sooner the better?
Well, of course, yes.
Sooner we're standing on a box and breathing through a straw. We'll have no option.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'm sure some of you have seen that. Was it Oxfordshire where there was a refusal of planning permission on the basis of an Environment Agency objection that there wasn't sufficient sewerage capacity? Asking us these questions, we do need to point out that we are under pressure to deliver on those housing numbers. And we can't just kind of throw our hands in the air and say, well, we don't think there's sufficient capacity in South West Water based on our kind of observations. We're going to need that underpinned by solid evidence. But it is important to point out that with the change from mandatory to advisory housing numbers, absolutely nothing has changed. And I think it is very important that we point out that, you know, I want to put it as a spot the difference game. This is how we had to challenge housing numbers under the old system. Here's how we challenge them under the new system, and it is exactly the same process. Okay, Councillor Barlow and then Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if the water cycle report is now finished, because again, we've been waiting obviously for it. I believe it was due to be finished in November 22. And I know that they've been saying that South West Water have held them up. If it is now completed and we're now waiting for a quote for them to come in to do it, is there anything to stop us seeing the report so that we can start digesting the report, so that when they come we can actually have pertinent questions for them, rather than wait for them to come and do it and then we'll have to look at it, think about it, and then you know, won't get the questions that perhaps we should be asking them.
Yeah, I think as soon as we get that date, probably might be a good idea to get that.
Is it done? That was the question. Is it done? Is it complete? And if it is complete, why can't we see it before it's presented?
I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on that one. I've got a couple more speakers, and then I'll get Mr. Freeman to answer some of those questions. Councillor Parr.
Thank you, Chairman. On, well, I don't know what page. Paragraph 1.6. There's mention of neighbourhood plan groups. Well, I think I can say that from Collerton and Colliford, when they see this and they see the figures that are being allocated to our neighbourhood area, they are going to feel totally betrayed, undermined, walked over. I really am. I'm certain there is going to be extreme disappointment, because they have said there's no need in that. There's no local need. There'll be the number of affordable houses already coming forward in the Ceramtech site, and they will not understand the numbers here.
Okay, I'm not sure there's anything totally new about this, in that a lot of the sites have already gone out to consultation. So all this does is kind of tots up the sites within various parishes or DNAs as they are here. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back. I wanted to ask you to look at the figures, which I've just lost because my screen moved at the wrong moment. But I want you to consider the statistics, which I can half remember. On why would Woodbury and Lympstone be disgruntled, you know, with these figures? Let me explain. Last night I went to the first meeting for a Lympstone neighbourhood plan complete revamp, and that they've started already. And one of the things they mentioned was, well, we didn't get it completely right. We didn't get enough affordable homes, which we wanted to get, but we tried our best, and we must be careful moving forward. And they said, but we, in comparison to other parishes, we succeeded. And it looks like we're just about to be punished for being successful. So please consider that when we look at this formula, because I want you to say, have a look. Who represents Woodbury, Lympstone? 2 councillors on East Devon. That's 2, because you know it's population related, isn't it? Our wards and how many councillors you get. So there's 2 people represent Woodbury and Lympstone, and we're looking just over 700 dwellings. Yes, okay. Then let's have a look at Exmouth, which has 14 councillors because it's population related. Oh, and Exmouth is top of the hierarchy, and my memory says that it's 17 houses allocated, you know, targeted through this formula, more at Exmouth than Lympstone. Don't tell me that's a rational or fair way to calculate the housing distribution. Then have a look at Honiton. Where is it 5 councillors at the moment represent? It's 3 and 2, isn't it? So, and they've got, I think it's about 60% housing allocated in comparison to this one ward of Woodbury and Lympstone.
It's page 79, if anybody's
Oh,
looking,
thank you.
I think.
I'll look later. But that's why I'm saying we really ought to think again, because that's irrational and unreasonable to punish those communities when you look at what their population is, what type of ward they're in. It's a rural ward, and you're going to destroy those communities if you do that. You'll swamp them in the similar way as perhaps we shouldn't have swamped Exmouth in the 1980s and Honiton in the early noughties. Okay? Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm asking you to bear in mind that I think we should have a look at those two communities and have a think again about that formula, and are we being reasonable on them? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ed, come back on some of these points.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just come back to Councillor Barlow's point. The intention is to set up this meeting with Royal Haskellingh, who have done the water cycle study, and in advance of that meeting share a final draft of the water cycle study with members, so you have it in front of you. You then have the presentation and an opportunity to ask questions, but I don't have a final draft of the water cycle study at this point to be able to share that. That's still a work in progress. Turning to Councillor Parr's point, I think if we look at Collerton and Colliford, actually, it's if you go to Appendix G and page 16 of that, you can see what the Collerton and Colliford figures are made up of. And you'll see that, just using this as an example, because I think it helps with Councillor Ingham's point as well, you can see from the table that that figure is made up of 2 potential allocations, which we've already consulted on in the draft local plan of 25 homes and 24 homes each. And then the rest of it is commitments. So you've got land north of Yaffles, a 2013 application for 16 homes. Right there down, the other significant one is Saramtak, 72 homes, which then gets us to the designated neighbourhood housing requirement figure of 157 under option 1 without the windfall allowance. So the only thing that's new that people won't know about is the windfall allowance if we were to include one of 45 additional homes. Otherwise, the 157 in option 1 is what's already been consented and what we've already consulted on as potential allocations. Now, of course, no final decision's been made on those allocations. The members may decide they don't want to proceed with those allocations or proceed with one or the other, in which case these figures will flex accordingly. But this is just a snapshot in time of where we are. And the same is true in terms of Lympstone. I think I'm right in saying when we did the draft plan consultation, there was quite a lot in Lympstone that we consulted on, and that's why there's so much in Lympstone in here. But likewise, it's the allocations that we've already consulted on, plus the commitments, those that have got consent, those completed since 2020. And the only new bit is the windfall allowance, if you were to include it. But that's the option that we're consulting on. But fundamentally, we're consulting on the methodology here. The figures are really just to illustrate how the methodology pans out at the moment, at this fixed point in time. It will all change between now and the publication draft of the plan. What we're seeking views on really is the methodology. Now, from what members have said, it sounds like we need to look at the wording of the material that's going out in the consultation and have in big, bold, scary letters. You do not need to necessarily allocate any additional homes. This figure reflects what is currently coming forward that you as communities already know about, and happy to take away an action to make that incredibly clear in that wording for people to be aware of that, because I'm very conscious this is very complicated and very detailed, and it's unfortunate because we have to do this. This is something the NPPF requires us to do. We'll try and make it as simple as possible, but we need to do this as part of the consultation on the plan, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious that, and Ed alluded to windfalls there, that one of the things we haven't yet given Ed a steer on is whether we wish windfalls to be included or excluded. Yeah, Councillor Jess Bailey, sorry I missed you there.
That's okay. Sorry, it's kind of an old point because I had my hand up before Councillor Barlow, but I wanted to ask about the water study. And does that include a strategic flood risk assessment, or is that a separate piece of work? And when are we going to get that, please? Because surely that should be influencing where development is steered to or from. And also, I would say that I think what this chart shows is just a really stark reminder of how our hierarchy of settlements is not really being applied, and it's just some communities are being unfairly hammered with housing, and others that should be right at the top of the hierarchy and not having a proportionate share of their housing. And I know Ottery is a town, but it's already had 25% growth, and you can see there that it's going to get another 400 houses. Thank you.
Well, I think, yes, there's lots of discussions about the methodology, and I think one of the ones that was discussed was whether you do it on a kind of proportionate method, but if the sites aren't there, then that number becomes meaningless. I think that's my understanding. And we are going to get a lot of this kind of comparison, but it just depends where sites come forward and where there are possibilities for expansion. So if I could just ask members to concentrate on the issue of windfalls for a minute. And I'm sorry, Councillor Olive, you're going to bring us back to that.
I had 3 points, brief points to make, Chair, and one of them was that. One, between my two wards of Wimple and Rockbeer, we're proposing 1,366 homes. So I quite understand the issues that are being raised by folks on the opposite side of the room. As the chair has just said, we're not being asked to approve those numbers today. We're being asked to approve a calculation method for a strange little silly technical number that government is insisting that we designate. That is all we're being asked, and we're not actually even being asked to approve it. We're being asked to approve that it be sent out to a Regulation 18 consultation. So, you know, I second the chair's comments there about keeping us focused. Number two, Chair, I actually thought we'd covered off the windfalls point in the previous report that we had, February, I think maybe it was, where we agreed that the preferred approach was option 1 without the windfalls, rather than option 2. And I if my recollection is correct, the consultation materials reflect what we'd agreed in, and taking all of those points together, my third point was then to propose the recommendations as written, assuming Ed's taking that action to put some nice big red text in away for us. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Yes, indeed, and that might be one for the working party to look at, actually, is making sure that what goes out to consultation has appropriate wording and appropriate caveats. And you're quite right. We did agree that the overall housing figure would be exclusive of windfalls, but we also agreed a figure to go in for windfalls. So I think the allocations here, I think we still had the option whether we counted windfalls or not. Councillor Barlow.
Very quick point. I know, Chair, I keep going on about this water survey that we're waiting for. Yeah. Members should be aware, October 22, that's when it was supposed to come back to this council. They blame South West Water, obviously, for not doing that. Have we used our MP and other people to put pressure on South West Water to engage with them? And secondly, if we are waiting or we are asking for a quote for them to come and talk to us, has it been completed? And can we have a little bit more? I know, Ed has asked to answer this once already, but can we have a date? When will it come before us? Because the longer it leaves it, the harder it is for us to then say, is there a problem with sewage, and can we use that as a tool to stop this? And I just think that it's unacceptable for any contract to go on for this amount of time when, as I said, October 22, supposed to be presented to us, finished. Thank you.
A point of order, Chair. Pursuant to Part 4 of the Constitution, Rule 12.1, strictly speaking, we're supposed to check if my proposal is seconded.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will take a couple more speakers and then we'll go to a vote. But the important thing is that we are proceeding with normal business in advance. And I totally agree the consultation has been delayed, but they had to resort to freedom of information requests to South West Water to get some of the information. But I think they've got all the information. It's just there's a bit of toing and froing between our officers now and the consultants, Royal Haskellingh, as to the final sort of shape of the report. Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, I'm going to have to leave shortly. So I was just going to support Councillor Olive's point that essentially this question be put, and I share other members' frustration about ancillary issues, but this is not the issue that's in front of us. So essentially, if we could just move to a vote, and then that's it, and then the other issues can come back. Members can submit to the Chair and Vice Chair their concerns. They can be teased out. They can go to scrutiny if they want, but it's not pertinent to what we're being asked here. This is the technical point. I think Mr. Freeman's been quite clear. We're required to do it. The issue and debate about housing numbers, that's an issue for this committee, and it's been going on for 5, 10, 20 years. That's an issue for another day. But this is a very clear point, and the information that came with it is necessarily complex, but the question isn't. Thank you.
So just to be clear, we're only going out to consultation on the neighbourhood allocations, and we will get feedback on those. Councillor Bailey.
Sorry, I think one of the things I'll be saying in the working group is that we need to have an item on the agenda where we can raise issues that we're concerned about, because otherwise they get brought into, you know, other items. So we need to have an agenda item where we can ask these important questions. And, you know, I'd be really grateful for Ed to answer Councillor Barlow's question, please, if that's possible. Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
And my question.
I'll come back to Mr. Freeman for any other points.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of Councillor Jess Bailey's point, yes, the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment is part of that commission. I believe they've completed phase 1 of that, but they need to obviously look at specific sites and their impact in terms of the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment, so there's further work to be done on that. In terms of Councillor Barlow's point, yes, it's unfortunate it's delayed. We've been managing that contract as best we can. There were issues, as the Chair has said, in terms of obtaining information from South West Water. There are also some significant staffing and resource issues at Royal Haskening in terms of being able to complete the work. But we have put a lot of pressure on them recently. We haven't needed to resort to MPs or other engagement in that. I'm not sure what influence they would have over consultants that we've commissioned, but we have, as the officers managing that contract, been putting a lot of pressure on them to complete that work. And as I say, it is almost complete. I'm just waiting on a final draft so that we can circulate that to members and set up this presentation. But there are some issues with the draft that we've got so far that means I don't think it would be appropriate to circulate that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, we'll go to a vote now. So we have 4 recommendations endorsing the report, noting the calculations, agreeing the method selection, and agreeing the non-technical summary information. I'm not going to read the full recommendations because you've had them all. So if we can vote on those 4 together, all in favour.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in support.
Any against? Councillor Ingham.
2 against.
And abstentions?
No.
Usually.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
So that's carried.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 9 then. Coastal preservation area policy boundaries in the new local plan. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee has previously agreed to review the coastal preservation area boundaries as part of ongoing work on the local plan. Obviously, it's a designation in the plan, so we need to make sure that the boundaries are up to date and robust. Members may notice I've been joined by Chris Harriades, our landscape architect, who's been leading on this work and is here to answer any questions members have in terms of the detailed work. But just to give you a brief overview to start with, so essentially coastal preservation areas are designed to protect the undeveloped coast, which is a requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework. Areas for inclusion should be substantially unaffected by development and should be generally either visible from a cliff top, beach, sea or estuary, or form part of the view from significant lengths of routes leading to or along the coast. Settlements are excluded where their size and form is a clear departure from the undeveloped character, although historic hamlets and farmsteads and some landmark buildings might be included where they positively contribute to the coastal character. Equally, more modern developments such as caravan parks and agricultural sheds could be included where their exclusion would perpetuate harmful forms of development. The coastal preservation areas have been broken down into 5 distinct areas, which can be seen on the maps between paragraphs 2.9 and 2.10 in the report. Ultimately, the work concludes that relatively little development has taken place that impacts on the character of the undeveloped coast, which suggests that the policy is working and should be continued. Only a few changes are proposed to the coastal preservation areas at this stage, and these are inclusions to correct anomalies in the previous boundaries, to include areas that are now considered to be important to protecting the undeveloped coast. And where land is to be omitted, it's generally where recent developments have taken place, meaning it's no longer appropriate for them to be included. Generally, these have been minor extensions of existing built form on the peripheries of the coastal preservation areas to meet local housing and employment needs. You know, one of the key ones is the housing site in Beer that's come forward through a community housing trust to community land trust rather to meet local housing needs in that settlement. It should be noted that there are 10 potential allocations within the draft plan that are within the proposed coastal preservation areas and would logically be removed from the coastal preservation area in the event that they are to be allocated. Since no final decisions has been made on allocations, it's proposed at this stage to consult on the coastal preservation area, including these areas, and then the relative merits of allocating these sites versus their impact on the coastal preservation area can be considered later, with the benefit of the consultation responses to inform that debate. These sites, however, amount to land for 882 homes, and so if these were not allocated, then land would have to be found elsewhere, and potentially in more sensitive locations to meet the housing need. So there is that knock-on impact of making those areas coastal preservation area rather than allocating the land. So members need to be aware of those issues and that balancing act that we will need to address later on when we come to look at which allocations go forward into the Reg 19 publication draft of the plan. But at this stage, members are simply asked to endorse the assessment of the coastal preservation areas and agree that the draft boundaries be consulted on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thanks for that clarification. I've got you, Councillor Young, because I did notice that one of the proposed allocations, I think it's only a second choice, on the edge of Exmouth, we were proposing to keep the coastal preservation area there, and I wondered how that sat, but I understand that now, so thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Young first.
Thank you, Chair. I've done some research on coastal protection areas, and it seems that Timbridge has gone a lot further than what we are proposing. What I want to say today, though, is following on our discussions regarding green wedges, I would like to make the following comments. Over the last few years, it would seem we have used green wedge designation more to determine if a planning application is acceptable in these coastal locations rather than coastal protection zones. I would like to suggest a more straightforward, a strengthened version that is proposed to the description. Coastal preservation areas, land, around the coast and estuaries of East Devon, as identified on the policies map, is identified as a coastal preservation area. The coastal preservation area is defined on the basis of visual openness and views to and from the sea. Development or any change of use will not be allowed if it would damage the underdeveloped open status of the designated area or where visually connected to any adjoining areas. Only appropriate proposals which would increase biodiversity or habitat mitigation or provide improved public footpath or multi-use trails or footmit woodland creation, SANGS areas, country parks, multi-use or footpath trails that would benefit the coastal areas for nature and for increased public access. However, prior to any final decision, EDC need to review Timbridge's EN2 undeveloped coast. As we face them and benefit from their coast on the opposite bank of the Exe, it may be appropriate to mirror their policies in this regard and prior to the next consultation compare the two strategies and possibly combine the two district strategies together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that obviously we're going to be discussing the exact policy wording at some future point. At the moment we're just going out to consultation on these, but I think you make some very good points there. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. Just curious how much of this is It's not AOMB, is it? Whatever it's called now. That's the one. How do they compare? What do you call it, protection-wise or whatever? What's the difference? I didn't realise up the X is outside of AOMB, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll get Mr. Freeman to come back on that, because I think it would be good to know what status this designation has. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Chair, may I take the liberty of answering a question with your permission? When it was put before a cabinet meeting, I did ask our Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty officer at the meeting, will this make any difference to the protection? And he said the protection is exactly the same as it is now under the old system as it will be under the new system. And he assured me of that, so hopefully that will be correct. Ed will put me right if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to Mr. Freeman in a minute. I'm sorry, I jumped a couple of people there. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I ask folks to look on page 305, and you see how extensive that coastal preservation area is on the east side of the ex-estuary, and that's for good reason, and that's why that area, although it's not in an area of outstanding natural beauty or whatever we want to call that this month, it is rather pretty and is worth looking after. Chair, I'd just like to run through, say page 307 and X-Mode 23, that's why it's unacceptable in my eyes, and it is beyond, it's just within the boundary of Exmouth, but the actual built-up area boundary with small letters, it's way outside, and it would be promoting a linear development, which well, if you're as old as me, Chair, you learnt about in O-level geography, age 14, 15, was totally unacceptable, and I'd suggest it still is and unnecessary. Then on page 308, you have Limpo 7, which is more of the same, because for two reasons. It's in the coastal preservation area, and we were just saying, keep the green wedges. Guess what? That's inside the green wedge, so we shouldn't be doing that. So that makes sense that we don't consider that. Then the delicate one on page, well, you can see it on page 308. That's GHED 72 that Mr. Freeman mentioned, and GHED 73, a really odd one there because we're right up against the boundary. Back in the 1980s, when 73 changed hands, they said, oh, well, that's going to be developed. It's funny, it still hasn't been developed, has it? One small part has, and I'd say you just look at that road. So if you, in my opinion, moved back the coastal preservation area to enable 73, I don't think that would be tragic. We just did that oblong bit within it only a few years ago, about 8 years ago. It was included in Lympston's neighbourhood plan, so I know the community accept that as being, par for the course over the last 40 years. But I don't agree with its with 72, because that's the other side of the road, the other side of the settlement, and it's far more visible, which is what the coastal preservation area is all about. So I wouldn't like to see 72 come forward, but I think our community would be absolutely, accept that, take it on the chin for 73. Then on page, also the same page, Limpo 8, do you know that on Summer Lane, just very near to the end of Denon Way? I don't think that's right. I think we should stick to the coastal preservation area, but perhaps, and I think that on page 311, you've got actually an Exton where it says Wood 28. If you're going to enable 73 in Limpston, perhaps you're going to enable a bit of growth in Exton by changing the boundary to be inclusive of that, following the road. But that's perhaps small potatoes to some. But one of the most important for me is on page 310, Chair, where you see Limp 09 and 10A. Not only are they within the conservation area, they are in Limpston Parish, but they're right up against Hullam Road. And if you followed the line of that green wedge that starts at the estuary and goes north of Exmouth, it stops round about, before Limp 08. But what we should be doing is, if we've got to identify sangs as a result of development at Exmouth, what a beautiful idea is to do that along the northern side of Hullam Road, and if you know it, between Exview Road and the road to Budley. Yes, we have a beautiful strip there. It's pretty much all in one owner's in ownership of one, which is the Harefield Estates. I won't go into detail, but I think they might be pleased to bite a hand off, and for a Sangs area like there would be, I think, ideal, because people from Exmouth could get there pretty easily, and I think it would be a neat idea. But we shouldn't be certainly thinking of building or developing anyway there. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for letting me speak.
Just before anybody else picks up on that, I think we're straying off the actual item on the agenda a bit. I appreciate your thoughts, but we're consulting on the preservation areas, the coastal preservation areas, and the methodology for it, rather than looking at the individual sites in there and
but Chair,
discussing
there was two that I was saying you could actually move it, so I think that was relevant, and the rest to leave alone.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Howe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, one point I was going to raise is we're going completely off base because we're talking about allocations instead of coastal preservation areas. I want to come back. Well, I want to mention my ward 326, and this might be where Chris comes in here, because I'm looking at this and there's a small chunk being taken out. That's approved, being developed. I get that, but there is land that I believe hasn't been included in the coastal preservation zone that I think should be. And I'm just wondering why we don't include, when you go up the side of a river, why the river basin itself is not included as a starting point. And there's quite a bit of land around the road that is visible from all aspects, including what we currently allocate and future allocations, but isn't included. And I'm trying to understand why not. Because it seems to make no sense that we're missing a whole piece out that seems to conform with our remit. So I'm just asking the question.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll come back on that one in a minute. Councillor Ledger.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say I'm happy to recommend the recommendations listed in the report 1 and 2. I don't think I've heard anything that would make me change my mind in regards to consultation on the documents seen.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Bethany Collins. Councillor Barlow. I'm departing from my own resolution not to allow...
I haven't spoken on this point yet.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's
No.
right. I don't mind being picked out, as usual.
It was the fact your microphone was still on from the last time, I think. That,
Chair, I just wanted to obviously bring up, it would be remiss of me not to, the allocation in Sidmouth Sib Forward is being, I think it's one of the few that is proposed to be omitted from the CPA, a big old chunk of it. I wonder if we could just say why that is. You're going to say because you can't see the sea from there, but which I suppose might be a good reason. But I just wanted to be clear on that. And obviously, again, it's a bit like the green wedges, isn't it? You're going to put this to people, and people will be scared in Sidmouth that there is a big area that will be, you know, why are you removing it? If it's been in there before, why? Thank you.
Yeah, I think because it's been put forward for housing. But I'll let Ed and Chris answer that. Nice to meet you, by the way, Chris. I've often read your reports with great enjoyment, and so it's really good to be able to put a face to the name. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they're both on now.
No.
Didn't think mine was working. Do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. I think, Mr. Chair, 2 points really are the point of Mike's about the why we haven't gone further up the river. The basic thing is to go to normal tidal limit, and I think that area above is above the tidal limit, so it's not coastal area. I'll double check that, but that's my understanding.
So can we allocate it to the tidal limit?
Yeah.
But
I mean,
go on.
It's where does an estuary become? Where does the coastal influence end within as you go inland up an estuary? And the natural point is high water, normal tidal limit. So that should be marked on the OS map, and I can't see it on the map extracts I've got in front of me, but I can double check that.
Yeah, but even using that assumption, the river is still there. The River Exe is just further down that is tidal. In fact, the Clist is semi-tidal all the way as far as Clist St Mary. We've got an allocation here.
Yeah.
We're not allocating any of this. And it doesn't seem to make any sense not to allocate, particularly that land, on the inside of the river.
Which bit are you saying, Mike?
Darts Farm is here, Darts Business Park here. All this is allocated, but here isn't. Page is 326.
Up the top.
Yeah. It's just as visible from the river. It's just as visible from the Exe. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. As I say.
You're talking about this area?
This area in particular. Yeah.
Oh, on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think through you, Chair, I think obviously this is to go out to consultation, so if members and the communities have comments on things like that, we can always look at extending the coastal preservation area in response to consultations at a later date. This isn't the final opportunity in terms of the boundary, so maybe that's a comment to make through the consultation. In the meantime, me and Chris can take that away and have a look at that in terms of where the I think it's basically where the coastal influence ends fundamentally and it becomes a river.
Yeah,
so we can look at that.
Did you want to pick up
I think it's usually got some lovely Devon Reds grazing in there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the other point was about the emission at Sidford, and one of the considerations is in desktop research is looking at the published landscape character assessments that we have. So that's the Devon Landscape Character Area Assessment by Devon County, and our own East Devon Landscape Character Assessment, which looks at landscape character types. And generally the boundaries of the CPA fit within the coastal landscape character types, landscape character areas. The area of land at Sidford sits within the East Devon Central Ridge landscape character area, which is an inland character type. The area to the south of it is the Lyme Bay coastal plateau. So if you look at the landscape character assessments, clearly the coastal plateau, coastal landscape, and there's a distinction, clear distinction as you go beyond Fortescue. The land has a northwesterly aspect, so it's looking away from the coast. There are no coastal views there. Views back to the south where you get them are with development in them. So it seemed like there was it didn't withstand scrutiny, the current inclusion within that area on that basis.
It did on the last inspection.
Well,
Does that answer your question, Ian?
Well, sorry, I was just going to say, but it was a bit like the green wedges. You know, it did stand up in the last local plan, the last inspection that it was put through, but now we're saying it won't. Look, I'm just saying that it's going to scare people again, and this is something. Is it necessary? Should we be doing it? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've heard from Chris there, so we've had a proposal, I think, and a seconder, so I suggest at that point we go to a vote. Did you want to come back, Ed?
Chair, my only thought in terms of Councillor Barlow's comment is I don't think we had the landscape character assessment work that Chris is referring to at the time we did the last local plan. So this is something that's come from improved evidence and assessment since the previous work. But I see this as with all of these issues, with a new local plan, we need to revisit these things, make sure what we've got is robust and learn from new evidence that's come forward and amend boundaries and change things accordingly. But it's only going out for consultation. I'm sure if the residents of Sidbury feel strongly, they will let us know and we can consider their views moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So, all in favour of the two recommendations here?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry, Councillor.
The members of the committee, obviously, other councillors and public speakers as well, and our observer who's stuck with us through it.